that beneath all of our exterior facades, I know for a fact that we emanate from the space of the absolute, that we are an arising from the oneness. And yet, in the space of relationship, on a day-to-day basis, that's not necessarily the messaging and the communication that I am getting. Now, sometimes for me, I'll give you a little example of what this may look like for me in terms of my spiritual practice. When I'm walking around in the world and I see faces that look different than mine, I have been psychologically primed by my cultural conditioning to make a lot of assumptions about every single face that I meet. And just because I am a woman of color, I am a Black woman, I'm also a woman of mixed race, there's so many different identifiers I could put out there. But because I consider myself to belong to a class of people who are oppressed, doesn't mean that there aren't mechanisms in my mind and in my heart and in my body which are enforcing that oppression within me. I have to take responsibility for that. So as I am walking and I am navigating, I may see a face, and this happens to me a lot. I'll see a face and I'll think, that's a white person. They're from a European background. They're born here in America. They're of a certain age. Maybe if they don't necessarily smile or look my way and acknowledge my presence as I walk by, the thoughts begin to spiral. And it could go anywhere from, man, are they having a bad day? To, they might be racist. They might not like or appreciate me for who I am because of the way that I look. They have a history of privilege, of protection, and of safety that has been afforded to them because of the way that they look. And then there is an arrow that pierces my heart of anger. And all of a sudden, I have made up this incredibly complex narrative around this total stranger that I pass by on the street. I have no idea what kind of life they are living. And this is where my spirituality, my spiritual practices, my contemplative skills really come to bear. Because in that moment, I'm able to feel into the disconnect in my legs, the tightening in my heart, the narrative in my mind, and then I can open up to a place and space that is more rooted in possibility, that is less defined. And I can remind myself, I have this narrative in my mind about this person that tells me, I know who you are, I know what you're about, I know what you think of me. And then there is also this pain that I am carrying that is so deeply intergenerational. It is the pain of my mother in segregated Virginia South. It's the pain of my grandmother who lived through Jim Crow. It's the pain of every single sharecropping ancestor who I had, those who were enslaved. And then it is also the pain of my Irish ancestors who were not enslaved and who came to this country. And I have this memory. I asked my aunt one day, I said, I did this genetic test, and I said, I just found out that I'm a quarter Irish, and I had no idea, living in my entire life, knowing that so much of the fear and the hatred and the anger that I had carried looking at so many faces who I assumed were white identified, that European blood also ran within me. How do I reconcile this within my body? And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, honey, there's no way that came through love. It was probably rape. So you don't need to worry about that. Just focus in on your blackness." Now, in that moment, what I was really wanting to consider was the possibility that two people had come together several generations ago in spite of the cultural conditioning of this country, in spite of the institutions that were built to place us in these power structures, power against rather than power with. I wanted to entertain the idea that they were still able to fall in love, and that their love is speaking through my heart, through this body, that it can emanate forth, and that can transform the ways in which I encounter the people who I see on the street. But that was shut down in that moment. Now, I don't have any idea how these people came together, but I think what it is that I'm trying to offer up to the audience today is that we have these phenomenal histories of complexity that live deep inside of our bodies. That we have these rich histories of love and of pain and of betrayal, so rich, that are playing out in our hearts and in our minds and in the assumptions that we make about one another. And I believe that we really need to dig into our spiritual practices in a way that doesn't push those complexities aside in the name of just oneness, but that we have to really consider how we can build containers and relationships and experiences that can hold that complexity with intimacy and tenderness, that can hold it maybe with some mourning, that can hold the grief, but then also that can hold the joy of all of us coming together. And maybe if we can feel rather than think our way through that process with one another, then we can come to meet each other with a greater sense of realness, not just what's up here, not all of the cultural conditioning, which is going to remain, but I'm just wondering, what would it take in this place, to play off of what you were saying, Orland, what would it truly take for us to feel into belonging here, now, in a way that we could take that with us out into the world?